My mom died on a Tuesday night. Not she'd been sick for a while. Dead. Not we saw it coming dead. Just one phone call that split my life into before and after. And suddenly I'm standing in my kitchen staring at a voicemail from the hospital, trying to figure out how a person can be gone when their mug is still in the sink. The next morning, I emailed HR 2 sentences that felt unreal to type. My mother passed away. I need 2 days off to travel home and arrange the funeral. I didn't ask for a week. I didn't ask for anything dramatic. 2 days. 48 hours to bury the woman who raised me. HR replied in under 10 minutes. They didn't say I'm sorry for your loss. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't even use my name. It was this neat corporate paragraph about coverage needs and business continuity, followed by one line that made my stomach drop. You'll need to choose between work and family. I read it 3 times, thinking I was misunderstanding. Like maybe it was badly worded. Maybe someone hit send too fast. So I called. I got the HR generalist first, soft voice. Practice sympathy without actual sympathy. She told me she understood, but policies were policies. She said bereavement leave was at manager discretion, and my manager had already flagged my role as critical this week. I asked what critical meant when my mom was dead. She paused and said, "We have quarter-end deliverables." I laughed once, involuntarily, like my body was trying to reject the conversation. I said, "So you're telling me I can't go bury my mom because of quarter-end?" She didn't answer that directly. She just repeated the same sentence in a calmer tone, like if she said it gently enough, it would become humane. If you're absent without approval, it may be treated as job abandonment. Job abandonment. Like I was running off to Vegas, like I was taking a spontaneous vacation. My mother was in a morgue, and they were talking to me like I was a scheduling problem. I hung up and walked into my living room where my laptop was still open to a spreadsheet I'd been updating the day before. I stared at the cells and realized I couldn't remember what any of it meant. My hands were shaking, not in a cinematic way, but in that quiet way where you don't notice until you try to hold something steady. I called my manager next. He picked up on the second ring, upbeat at first, like he expected a question about a report. I told him what happened. There was silence, and for half a second I thought maybe he'd surprise me. Maybe he'd say, "Go, don't worry about it." Instead, he sighed, like I'd just handed him a problem he didn't want to solve. "I'm really sorry," he said, and I could hear him typing while he said it, like he was multitasking my grief. "But this is a bad week. If you disappear, it puts us in a bind." I said, "My mom is gone." "I know," he replied, voice still in that same managerial cadence. "But we all have stuff. You know how it is." That sentence did something to me. Not anger exactly, something colder. A realization that if I stayed here, if I let them reduce this to stuff, I would hate myself for it. For the rest of my life, I'd remember the week I chose emails over my mother's grave. I told him I was going anyway. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me directly. He just said, "Then I need you to understand the consequences." I asked him to email me that. Another pause. He said he'd circle back, which in corporate language means I want to say it, but I don't want it in writing. So I did the thing I've learned to do at this job whenever someone starts getting careful with their words. I made it simple. I sent him an email while we were still on the phone. Subject line, bereavement leave request, confirmation. In the body, I summarized what HR told me and what he just told me. I ended with, "Please confirm that taking 2 days to attend my mother's funeral will be considered unapproved absence and may result in disciplinary action." He didn't respond. HR did. They replied to my summary email with a slightly different tone, still cold but now more legal. They wrote, "We are not denying your request. We are informing you that time off cannot be accommodated at this time. Any absence will be addressed per attendance policy." That's when it clicked. They wanted me to disappear without a paper trail. They wanted me to feel guilty enough to stay, or reckless enough to go and give them something they could punish. I sat there in my apartment, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, and I looked at the plane ticket page on my phone. The price had already gone up since yesterday. My sister had texted me a photo of our mom's purse on the hospital bed, her keys still clipped on, her little grocery list folded in half, the same way she always did it. And I thought, if I don't get on that plane, I will never forgive myself. So I packed a small bag, not for a trip, for a funeral. I unplugged my work laptop and left it on the desk like it was something poisonous. Then I opened a new folder on my phone and took screenshots of every email, every message, every policy link HR had sent me. Because if they were going to turn my mother's death into a compliance issue, I was going to make sure every word was preserved. Before I walked out the door, I did one last thing. I sent HR a final email. I will be absent for 2 days to attend my mother's burial. I am notifying you, not requesting permission. I will return on Thursday, ready to resume my duties. My finger hovered over send for a second. Then I hit it, and as soon as I did, my phone buzzed with an immediate reply notification. So fast it felt like someone had been waiting. I didn't open it yet. I just stared at the screen, bag on my shoulder, heart pounding, and realized this wasn't going to end with me quietly coming back to work, like nothing happened. I buried my mom on a Thursday morning under a gray sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. There were maybe 20 people there. Family, a few neighbors, 2 women from her church who kept calling me baby, like I was still 10 years old. I held it together until the end, until the last clump of dirt hit the coffin with that dull sound that tells you this is real now. Then I went numb in a way I didn't know was possible. On the flight back, I didn't cry. I just kept thinking about that unread email sitting on my phone like a landmine. When I finally opened it somewhere over the Midwest, it was exactly what you'd expect. Please confirm your return date and availability. We will discuss next steps upon your arrival. No condolences. No acknowledgement of why I'd been gone. Just next steps. When I walked into the office the following Monday, it felt like I was late to my own trial. Conversations stopped when I passed. People didn't avoid me aggressively. Worse, they were polite in that stiff, uncomfortable way reserved for HR situations and contagious diseases. My manager didn't come to greet me. HR didn't call me in. They let me sit at my desk for almost an hour, answering emails like everything was normal. Then the calendar invite popped up. Mandatory meeting, HR and management, no agenda, no notes. Just a conference room and 3 names. But that was just the beginning. The room was small and overly bright, one of those spaces designed to make you feel exposed. HR was already there, along with my manager and someone I'd never met before, a woman in her 40s with a legal pad and no company badge. She introduced herself as support from people operations. She didn't smile. They started with, "We hope you're doing okay," said in unison like it was scripted. Then they moved straight into policy, attendance, communication, expectations. They talked at me for 10 minutes without asking a single question, like my presence was a formality. Then HR slid a document across the table. It was a written warning, pre-filled, dated for the days I'd been gone. Unauthorized absence, failure to secure approval, impact to team operations. I read it slowly, line by line, while my manager stared at the table. When I looked up, HR said, "This is not a termination. This is corrective action." I asked a simple question. "Can you show me where the policy says bereavement leave requires manager approval?" The room shifted. The woman from People Ops finally looked at me. HR said, "Bereavement is discretionary." I said, "No. It says up to 3 days for immediate family. There's no discretionary language. It's not PTO." My manager cleared his throat and said, "In practice," I cut him off, calmly. "In practice doesn't override written policy." That was the first crack, small but real. They tried a different angle. They said my absence created risk, that my role required reliability, that choices have consequences. I listened, I nodded, and while they talked, I realized something important. None of this was new. They had decided my fate the moment I got on that plane. This meeting wasn't about discipline, it was about documentation. So I stopped defending myself. I asked them to clarify timelines. I asked who approved the warning. I asked why my email, summarizing HR's own language, hadn't been corrected. Every question was neutral, professional, curious. They answered carefully now, too carefully. At one point, the people ops woman said, "We're just trying to align expectations moving forward." And that's when I said it. Then I'd like a copy of all internal communications regarding my absence. Silence. Thick enough to hear the hum of the lights. HR blinked. "Why would you need that?" I shrugged. "So I can align too." The meeting ended abruptly after that. They told me they'd review the warning and follow up. I went back to my desk and realized my system access had been partially restricted. Nothing critical, just enough to slow me down, a quiet punishment. That night, at home, I opened my laptop, not my work one, my personal one. I laid everything out chronologically, emails, timestamps, policy screenshots, meeting notes I'd typed the moment I left the room. I noticed patterns I'd missed before, language shifts, contradictions, places where they'd relied on fear instead of rules. That's when I realized I'd been saving people who never wanted saving. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was focused. I booked a consultation with an employment attorney for the next morning. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't threaten. I just prepared. Because if they wanted to play this as a policy issue, I was finally ready to speak their language. And somewhere between organizing files and setting reminders, a strange calm settled in. Not relief, not anger, clarity. They thought I'd come back smaller, quieter, grateful to still have a job. They had no idea what they'd just set in motion. The attorney didn't sound impressed when I explained what happened. That scared me at first, until she said, "This is unfortunately common." Then she asked me to forward everything, all of it. Emails, calendar invites, policy screenshots, the written warning. The follow-up where HR said they were reviewing internally while quietly restricting my access. She didn't interrupt once. When she was done reading, she said, "They've already crossed into retaliation. The question is how far they're willing to go." I found out the answer 2 days later. Another meeting invite hit my calendar. Same room, same people, plus one new name, Director, Human Resources, higher up, more polished, the kind of title meant to make you feel small. I walked in with a notebook and my phone, nothing else. They had a folder. The HR director did the talking this time. Calm, professional, sympathetic tone. She said they'd reviewed the situation and decided to move forward with a performance improvement plan. 60 days, clear expectations. Failure to comply would result in further action. I asked, "Is this connected to my absence for my mother's funeral?" She smiled the way people do when they're pretending not to understand the question. "This is about a pattern." I said, "Please describe the pattern." She hesitated just long enough. That hesitation mattered. They slid the PIP across the table. It was vague on purpose. Words like responsiveness and team alignment. No metrics. No examples. Just enough rope. I looked at it, then at them, and said, "I'm going to need this meeting recorded in the minutes as disciplinary action following bereavement leave." The director leaned back. "We don't see it that way." I said, "That's fine, but regulators might." That changed the room. I explained calmly that I'd spoken with counsel, that I'd requested internal communications related to my absence, that I was formally objecting to the warning in the PIP as retaliatory. I didn't threaten a lawsuit. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated facts. The people ops woman started taking notes faster. The director asked, "Are you planning to escalate this?" I said, "I already did." Silence again. A deeper one this time. What they didn't know, what I hadn't said yet, was that my attorney had helped me file a complaint through the company's ethics hotline the night before. Not emotional, not dramatic, just documented, tied to policy language and dates. Those reports don't go to HR. They go to compliance. And compliance reports upward. I stood up when the meeting ended. No handshake, no closure, just, we'll be in touch. That afternoon, my manager didn't look at me once. By the next morning, everything changed. My access was fully restored. The PIP disappeared from the system. A company-wide email went out reminding managers of bereavement policy to avoid future misunderstandings. No names mentioned, but everyone knew. Then my attorney called. Compliance reached out, she said. They're concerned. Concerned was corporate for afraid. Over the next week, HR stopped contacting me directly. Everything went through legal. Meetings were postponed. Language softened. The written warning was officially rescinded pending review, which is another way of saying they knew it wouldn't survive scrutiny. My manager suddenly wanted to reset. He asked how I was doing. He said he wished things had gone differently. I listened. I didn't respond. Because by then, the outcome wasn't about my job anymore. It was about accountability. 2 Fridays later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Legal offered a separation package. Clean exit, severance, neutral reference. No admission of wrongdoing because companies don't do that, but enough money to make it clear they wanted this buried quietly. I asked for one change. I wanted the HR generalist and the manager named in the internal findings. They agreed. That was the moment I knew it was over. I signed the agreement on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, the HR director was no longer with the company. My manager was reassigned. Quietly. No announcement. Just gone from the org chart. People started messaging me after that, not to congratulate me, to tell me their own stories, missed funerals, denied emergencies, fear disguised as policy. That night, I went back through the folder on my laptop, the one that started as protection and turned into leverage, and closed it for the last time. They thought I was chaos they could manage. What they didn't understand was that I had nothing left to lose. The day after everything became official, I drove back to my hometown alone. No calls, no emails, no meetings waiting for me on Monday. Just an empty calendar and a quiet kind of exhaustion I hadn't felt before. Not burnout, not grief. Something closer to peace, but heavier. I visited my mom's grave in the early afternoon. The cemetery was almost empty. The way she would have liked it. She hated crowds. I stood there longer than I expected to, hands in my pockets, reading her name over and over like it might change. I told her what happened, not the corporate details, just the truth. I didn't let them make me choose, I said out loud. I chose you. That mattered more than anything else that followed. A week later, the severance hit my account. Enough to breathe. Enough to take time without panic. The paperwork arrived the same day. Clean, neutral language, carefully worded. My attorney reviewed it once more and said, "This is as good as it gets." She was right. What surprised me wasn't the money. It was how fast the noise stopped. No more Slack pings. No HR tone policing. No calendar anxiety. The part of my brain that had been braced for years slowly unclenched. I slept through the night for the first time since my mom died. Not because the pain was gone, but because the fight was. A few former coworkers reached out quietly. One asked how I'd managed it. Another said they wished they'd done the same when their dad passed. One message stuck with me. They always told us policy was policy. I didn't realize it only worked one way. Neither had I. Not until it mattered. I took a month off. Not a productivity break, not a recharge. Actual time? I sorted through my mom's things. Found old photos. Notes she'd written to herself. Lists. She loved lists. Grocery items mixed with reminders like call your son and be proud of him. That one hurt. In a good way. When I finally started looking for work again, I did it differently. I asked harder questions. I read policies like contracts, not suggestions. And when a recruiter once said, "We expect flexibility during crunch times," I asked what flexibility looked like during funerals. There was a pause, then an honest answer. That's the job I took. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that the company updated its bereavement policy, made it clearer. Less discretion. HR framed it as a proactive improvement. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need credit. Because this was never about winning. It was about not being erased in the moment you need to be human. Sometimes I think about that email HR sent, the one that told me to choose between work and family. I wonder how many people folded after reading something like that. How many swallowed it and stayed? How many regrets never made it into a spreadsheet? I still miss my mom every day. That doesn't go away. But when I think about that week now, the grief isn't tangled with shame anymore. I didn't abandon her. I didn't bargain her death down to acceptable business terms. I showed up. And in the end, that choice didn't cost me everything like they implied. It cost them. And I walked away with something they could never give me in the first place. My dignity intact, my priorities clear, and the quiet certainty that when it mattered most, I did the right thing.